From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Bryson, your host for the JAMA Oto podcast. I'm the director of the Cleveland Clinic Voice Center, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Professor Todd Ricketts from Vanderbilt University Medical Center, as well as Professor Yu-Hsiang Wu, Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Iowa. Today, we're going to be talking about their article exploring the impact of hearing aid service model and technology on patient outcomes. Professors Wu and Ricketts, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me as well.
Well, to our listeners, we have had some podcasts over the last probably several months to a year or more, kind of exploring hearing aids and patient outcomes, particularly in the context of broader accessibility to over-the-counter technology for hearing. And I read with interest your article looking at the impact on service model and technology across a number of different hearing aids and hearing aid platforms. If you'd be so kind, could you tell us a little bit, what prompted the study and what led you to want to take a look at this?
One of the things that we were really interested in was the idea of really providing cost-effective hearing aid services to individuals. And there's such benefit to hearing aid use that we know of across a whole wide range of things, including supporting healthy aging. And so we were doing this and actually designed this project before over-the-counter hearing aids existed yet. And so we were looking at ways that maybe there were people that wanted maybe not no support, but maybe not a full level of support. And so we were kind of looking at those different levels and beginning to explore how much professional services might impact outcomes, going from a full range to fairly limited to basically over the counter where there might be no professional services.
Yeah, so I'm curious, to hear you describe it that way. When you look at sort of the marketplace, you mentioned no service at all. What are the common portfolios of service that a customer or patient might get to choose from with hearing aids?
Well, basically, there's a huge range from no service to like full professional services. So traditionally, audiologists fit hearing aids, they provide services, and in good clinicians, they provide service based on the evidence-based practice. So everything is based on the evidence, including the fitting, counseling, and orientation and follow-up. That's the full set of the services. But unfortunately, although these are great services, they are quite expensive. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have no services. So basically, potential hearing aid users can go to like Walmart and purchase a pair of earbuds, cost $30, and no services at all. And in the middle, there are a lot of services, like sometimes this kind of hybrid model. So currently, some of the over-the-counter hearing aids company provides certain amount of services. So people who purchase over-the-counter hearing aids can go to the website and then maybe do the live chat with AI or some live agent. We don't know. And sometimes they can send their audiograms obtained from clinicians to the company. They may help you adjust the hearing aids. So the service could be quite limited, but there are some services possible in over-the-counter hearing aids. On the other hand, for the audiologists fit hearing aids, now audiologists start providing remote hearing aid fitting. And in that case, it's not in person for professional services. So there's a huge variation in terms of services from full services to no services.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. I guess I would assume oftentimes this is an aging population. So how they interface with technology can be really variable too. So you could see perhaps a patient wanting to have sort of that in-person, maybe more traditional service and refinement experience to possibly maybe a more technologically comfortable or advanced older adult that might be totally fine with doing things remotely. So I imagine it's a pretty interesting landscape. Tell us, how did you organize the study? What were some of the parameters you looked at?
Well, in this study, we are looking for the effect, not just about the service, but also the technology. So, Paul, like you say, in the past few years, people are really interested in about the effect of the hearing aid services on patient outcomes. But probably 5 or 10 years ago, both Professor Ricketts and I were really interested in the effect of technologies because hearing aid technologies changed so much. When I was a student 20 years ago and now, the hearing aid technology changed from very simple amplification devices to now just kind of like smartphones. You can do a lot of things, connect to the internet and even do streaming. So the hearing aid technologies, especially the technology used to improve the outcomes, to improve the speech understanding in noise, etc., they change quite a lot. So in the past few years, people have been trying to demonstrate that impact in the real world. However, in the laboratory, although we can demonstrate that impact, but the evidence supporting the real world outcome benefit actually is quite limited. So one of our goals here is that we want to examine the impact of services and the hearing aids technology together in one study. That's kind of like how we come up with this study design.
Yeah, so what were the groupings? How did you arrange technology and service, or how did it end up playing out as you organized it?
One of the things we did is because over-the-counter hearing aids weren't there yet, we ended up using 2 prescription hearing aids, one kind of serving as a proxy for over-the-counter, and we labeled them high end and low end in the study. And one of the things I think that is important to point out, and Dr. Wu suggested this, and that is that even the low-end hearing aid in our study 10 years previous would have been considered a high-end hearing aid. And so our comparison across technologies, and this is true of most of them, are kind of done within the same generation. And so I think that our study did not see a difference in outcomes across technologies, but they are technologies within the same generation, I think, which might be different if we looked at older and newer generations of technologies. We didn't study that, don't know that, but that's speculation.
Okay. So that's how the technology was organized. And then what were the service models? What were those grouped like?
So we have 3 services model. The first one is the full services from the audiologist. We call this group as a AUD group. And the second group is the over-the-counter hearing aid group. So we give them the hearing aids and then they just DIY. They try to learn how to use hearing aids. We didn't provide any services. And the third one is in between. That's the hybrid. So it's a combination of the audiologist fit hearing aids and over-the-counter hearing aids. So we call this over-the-counter OTC plus. Now everything's like to add a plus, Disney plus. And so we call this OTC plus group. And in this group, we have audiologists to provide very, very limited services to fit over-the-counter hearing aids. So it's a hybrid model, try to simulate a situation that audiologists dispense or provide over-the-counter hearing aids. So in short, we have 3 services group and 2 hearing aid technology treatment. So that's a 2x3 design.
Yeah, well, it's pretty interesting and it feels, certainly very real world applicable. So what did you find, and then anything you were surprised about?
Well, one thing that we want to know in this 3x2 design is that it would be great if we can find any interaction. Because over-the-counter hearing aids, if you think about it's DIY. So people have been thinking about, well, it's DIY, but technologies can help. Currently we have AI, we have machine learning. So maybe the DIY group, the OTC group, the high technology will provide a lot of benefit. But on the other hand, the AUD group, the audiology fit hearing aids group, maybe with the audiologist, they really teach the patients how to use hearing aids so that they can maximize the benefit of the high-end hearing aids. So again, this kind of like the smartphone. If you give me a smartphone, I'm old enough, I don't know how to use it. So if somebody can help me, teach me how to use it, maybe I can do better. So in this 2x3 design, we hope that we can see some interactions, But of course, this interaction is usually need a lot of participants to power the study. We don't have that power, but the result basically shows that there's no interaction. There's no services and technologies interaction. So that's kind of something that surprised me a little bit. It's not consistent, completely in line with what I'm thinking about. But on the other hand, for the main effect of the services and technology, that's basically in line with the literature. Of course, the services effect, we have some new findings. Maybe we can talk about that later.
I think for me, the biggest surprise was what happened with OTC Plus. And that was sort of our guess, was maybe a little services. We found that having full service professional model did lead to better outcomes, but we found that just a little bit of service didn't really seem to help. And so it really took the full services to lead to better outcomes. And so it's a question of whether we're approaching the right services, or if it's just the case that there are some patients that do really well with no services and some patients that really need the professional services and need most of them or need specific ones. And so that I think was one of the findings that I found surprising.
Yeah, it seems like the definition of full service could change over time as the technology and things change too, right? You could envision a pretty full service environment where you could get a person remotely or have a software package that might be full service, but it also seems the case that having that expert ability and sitting down with the person is still pretty valuable, right?
I think absolutely. We had patients that commented on, that would be randomized. This is an RCT, and we had patients randomized into the no service model. Like, I don't know how you expect me to do this by myself.
Yeah, and it's a big investment, and it is even just handling the hearing aid sometimes can be a little daunting for people, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's very true. But I think here there are kind of like two things working on the opposite direction. On one hand, we know like patient, when they invest a small fortune on the hearing aids, they want the more services, and the personal touch is really important. And we know a lot of older patients kind of like looking for that. But on the other hand, if you think about the DIY, the over-the-counter hearing aids, we have been talking about we want to empower our patient, right? Now it's the physician-centered care versus patient-centered care. And we are, in the past many decades, I think it's moved towards patient-centered care more and more. So if you think from that perspective, the over-the-counter hearing aids actually can empower the patients. Maybe that DIY stuff make them more like their hearing aids. So that's another thought. But we just finished another study. We kind of try to understand if there is a DIY effect, or more easier to understand, an IKEA effect.
Yeah.
And we did that study, and we found that there's no strong IKEA effect. People, especially the older adults with hearing loss that we see often, they like professionals' help.
Yeah, it makes sense. Any investigation into distance from the medical center? Sometimes older adults may live in more rural areas, or sometimes access is an issue just from transportation and otherwise. Maybe the study wasn't powered for that, but anything in the comments on getting to the expert help or things like that?
Well, that's a great question. I think in this study, most of the participants live locally, so the transportation seems not a big issue. But the transportation, the time and energy come to the clinic, actually, that would impact the accessibility. The only thing I could say is, again, that's another study, not the study that we are talking about here.
Yeah.
We examined the data from cochlear implant users, their home address and zip code, and rural versus urban, how close to our medical center here at Iowa. And we see the distance and the relationship with patient outcome. We didn't see any association.
Oh, that's reassuring.
Yeah. But that's cochlear implant. I don't know in the context of hearing aids.
Yeah.
One follow-up on that I think is one of the nice things about our study is Dr. Wu's site is in a medium-sized city in Iowa, and parking is not bad, and its travel time is not bad. Our medical center is in the center of Nashville. And so our patients complain all the time about having to come in and find parking and then find our center and find our lab. And yet we didn't see a site difference across this. We saw those same positive outcomes from our professional services despite the two different sites.
Well, that's a nice feature of the study, right? Because it captures like a pretty big city and then like a medium city with some rural features.
Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to congratulate you both on the paper and on the work and appreciate your time coming onto the podcast today. Any take-home messages for the listener or anything in the future that we should be looking for, along this line of inquiry?
Well, I think the bottom line here is in terms of service, a lot of people with hearing loss, they could benefit from hearing aids, but ends up not using hearing aids. Now we have over-the-counter hearing aids. And our study showed that although the over-the-counter hearing aids outcome is not as good as audiologist fit hearing aids, but over-the-counter hearing aids are still effective. So basically, some amplification is better than no amplification. And I think that could be like my take-home message from this study.
Yeah, and I think mine would come from the future, and that is that over-the-counter is still in its infancy, and service models are still rapidly changing, both within the over-the-counter and professional models. And so trying to figure out the best way to support patients who really want the support in a cost-effective manner is something that we will continue to study and continue to look at for those that may not be happiest with either full services or over-the-counter, but there may still be a path in between that I think is being explored.
Well, congrats again, and we'll look forward to seeing how the space evolves. And thanks again.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Well, I'm Paul Bryson, and I've been speaking with Drs. Ricketts and Wu about the impact of hearing aid service model and technology on patient outcomes. You can find a link to the article in this episode's description. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by Daniel Morrow at the JAMA Network. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.